The notification chimed on my phone at exactly 3:47 a.m. Baghdad time. I was lying on a thin cot in a shipping container that doubled as my quarters, listening to the distant hum of generators and the occasional crack of gunfire in the distance. 6 months into this private security contract, and I'd gotten used to sleeping through most sounds. But that text message? That cut through everything like a knife. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Don't worry about us, Felix. Paul's been such a huge help with the boys. We're managing just fine without you. Attached was a photo of my dining room table. My wife Mira sat there with our 2 sons, Jake and Tommy, aged 8 and 6. And right there, comfortable as you please, sat Paul Redding with his arm draped casually across the back of Mira's chair. Paul Slick Redding, her cousin's ex-boyfriend who'd been sniffing around our family for months before I left for this deployment. I stared at that photo for a solid 5 minutes, my tactical training warring with the sick feeling growing in my gut. Paul looked right at home in my chair, at my table with my family. The boys looked tired, maybe even scared, though Mira was beaming at the camera like she'd just won the lottery. I tried calling immediately, straight to voicemail, tried again an hour later. Same thing. By the time the sun came up over the Iraqi desert, I'd left 7 messages and sent 12 texts. Nothing. "You look like hell, Grant," said Rodriguez, my partner on this contract, as he found me chain-smoking behind the motor pool. "What's eating you?" I showed him the photo without saying a word. Rodriguez whistled low and shook his head. "Man, that's rough. But you know how it is. Families need help when we're deployed. Maybe this Paul guy is just being neighborly." Neighborly. I flicked my cigarette into the sand and watched it smolder. Yeah, maybe. But I knew Paul Redding. I'd known him for 3 years, ever since Mira's cousin brought him to a family barbecue. He was the kind of guy who sold used cars for a living, but called himself a real estate entrepreneur. The kind who wore gold chains and too much cologne, who always had a get-rich-quick scheme and never had money for lunch. The kind who looked at other men's wives a little too long and laughed a little too loud at their jokes. The kind who'd move in on a deployed soldier's family. I managed to get through to Mrs. Cormier, our 70-year-old neighbor, later that afternoon. She'd always been nosy, but today I was grateful for it. "Oh, Felix, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been wanting to call you, but I didn't know if I should get involved. That man has been there every day for 2 weeks, every single day. And the boys?" She paused. "The boys don't look happy, Felix. They look scared." "Scared how?" "Yesterday I heard yelling. Not Mira yelling. That man. And one of your boys was crying. I almost called the police, but then it got quiet again." My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone. "Mrs. Cormier, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to keep an eye on things, and if anything happens, anything at all, I need you to call me immediately. Can you do that?" "Of course, dear." "And Felix? I think you should come home." I hung up and immediately called my commanding officer. Emergency leave. Family crisis. I'd be on a transport plane within 18 hours. The flight back to Portland seemed to take forever. 18 hours of military transport, then commercial flights with layovers in Kuwait and Frankfurt. 36 hours total of sitting in uncomfortable seats, drinking bad coffee, and imagining every possible scenario. By the time I landed at Portland International, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe Paul really was just helping out. Maybe the boys were just tired in that photo. Maybe Mrs. Cormier was being her usual dramatic self. Then I got the voicemail. It was from Jake, my 8-year-old, and he was whispering like he didn't want to be heard. "Daddy? Daddy? When are you coming home? Paul is here all the time now and he's mean to us. He told us not to tell anyone about him being here or we'd get in big trouble. Mommy says he's helping, but he makes Tommy cry. Please come home, Daddy. Please." The message had been left 3 days ago. 3 days of my son being scared in his own home while I was flying across the world. I didn't go home first. I drove straight to Lincoln Elementary and waited in the parking lot until school let out. When Jake and Tommy came walking out, they looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. Tommy had a bruise on his cheek that looked fresh. "Daddy!" Jake ran to me, but stopped short like he was afraid to be too happy. "You came back!" Tommy hung back, thumb in his mouth, a habit he'd broken 2 years ago. I knelt down and pulled them both close. "Hey guys, I missed you so much. Are you okay?" Jake looked around nervously. "We're not supposed to talk about stuff. Paul says it's family business." "Paul's not family," I said quietly. "I am. You can tell me anything." Tommy finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "He hits us sometimes, when Mommy's not looking, and he sleeps in your bed." The world went very still around me. Cars were driving by, kids were laughing and running to their parents, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. "He what?" "He sleeps in your room," Jake said, "with Mommy. He said if we told anyone, he'd make sure you never came home." I stood up slowly, my hands clenched into fists. 3 years of tactical training, 2 deployments in Iraq, and 6 months of keeping my cool under pressure. All of it was about to go out the window. "Boys, we're going to get some ice cream, and then we're going to have a long talk about what's been happening while Daddy was away." As we walked toward my truck, my phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "Heard you're back in town. Paul and I are at the house. We need to talk." I looked at my sons, my scared, bruised, traumatized sons, and something cold and calculating settled into my chest. "Yeah," I muttered to myself, "we definitely need to talk." The house looked the same from the outside, same blue shutters, same overgrown hedge that I'd been meaning to trim before deployment, same basketball hoop with the bent rim that Jake had accidentally damaged last summer. But as I walked up the front steps with the boys, everything felt different. Wrong. I could hear music playing inside, some smooth jazz that I definitely hadn't left on my playlist. Through the window I saw movement in the kitchen. My kitchen. "Maybe we should knock," Jake whispered. I stared at my 8-year-old son, who thought he should knock on the door of his own house. "No, buddy. We live here." I opened the door and walked in. The smell hit me first. Cologne and cigarettes, neither of which belonged in my house. Then I saw them. Mira was at the stove, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hair done up in a way that suggested she'd spent time on it. Paul was sitting at my kitchen table, feet up on another chair, reading my newspaper and drinking coffee from my favorite mug, the one Jake had made me for Father's Day 2 years ago. They both turned when we walked in. Mira's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally a bright, fake smile. "Felix, you're home early. Why didn't you call?" Paul didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. He just nodded at me like we were old buddies. "Hey there, Felix. Welcome back, man." I set my duffel bag down slowly, keeping my voice level. "Boys, go upstairs and get cleaned up for dinner." "But Dad," Jake started. "Upstairs, now." They scurried up the stairs, and I waited until I heard their bedroom door close before I spoke again. "Get out." Paul chuckled and took another sip of coffee. "Come on, Felix. Don't be like that. Mira and I were just—" "I wasn't talking to you." I looked directly at Mira. "I was talking to my wife. Get him out of my house." Mira's fake smile faltered. "Felix, you're being ridiculous. Paul has been helping with the boys while you were gone. He's been a godsend." A godsend. I walked over to Tommy's booster seat and picked up a small toy car that was sitting there. Is that what we're calling it when a man hits other people's children? The silence that followed was deafening. Paul's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Mira's face went pale. "Felix, what are you talking about?" she said, but her voice had lost its conviction. I held up the toy car, a little red Ferrari that Tommy loved. This was broken when I left. Tommy cried for hours because the wheel came off. Now it's fixed. Tommy told me Paul fixed it for him right after he gave him that bruise on his cheek. Isn't that interesting? Paul set down the mug and stood up. Look, Felix, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Sit down. Something in my voice made him pause. Maybe it was the tone I'd used with insurgents in Fallujah. Maybe it was the way I was standing, balanced on the balls of my feet with my hands loose at my sides. Whatever it was, Paul sat back down. The misunderstanding, I continued, is that you thought I wouldn't find out. The misunderstanding is that you thought you could move into my house, sleep in my bed, terrorize my children, and I'd just accept it when I got back. It's not like that, Mira said quickly. Paul and I are just friends. He's been helping. Friends don't sleep in the same bed, Mira. And they sure as hell don't discipline other people's kids with their fists. Paul finally found his voice again. Now hold on just a minute. I never laid a hand on those boys in anger. If I corrected them, it was because they needed correcting. Mira asked me to help keep them in line. I turned to look at him fully for the first time since entering the house. Paul Redding was exactly what he'd always been. A small-time hustler with delusions of grandeur. 5'9" in his expensive shoes, soft around the middle, with the kind of tan that came from a bottle and the kind of confidence that came from never being truly challenged. You corrected them, I repeated, in my house, while sleeping in my bed, with my wife. Felix? Mira started. How long? I asked her. How long what? How long has this been going on? And don't lie to me. I've got phone records, bank statements, and very observant neighbors. I'll find out anyway. Mira looked at Paul, then back at me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd married 9 years ago. Uncertain, vulnerable, maybe even sorry. Then her expression hardened. 2 months, she said. Paul and I have been together for 2 months, and before you start throwing around accusations, you should know that you left us. You chose that job over your family. You chose money over being here. I chose to provide for my family. There's a difference. Is there? She was warming up now, getting angry, and I could see Paul nodding encouragement behind her. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you abandoned us. Paul was here when Jake had nightmares. Paul was here when Tommy got sick. Paul was here for the parent-teacher conferences and the soccer games and all the things you missed. Paul was here hitting my kids. I never hit them. Paul stood up again, his face flushed. I gave them a little discipline when they got out of line, something their father should have been here to do. That's when I moved. 3 quick steps across the kitchen, and I had Paul pressed against the refrigerator with my forearm across his throat. Not hard enough to hurt him, yet, but hard enough to make my point. Let me explain something to you, Paul. Those are my children. This is my house. That's my wife. And you are nothing. You're a bottom feeder who saw an opportunity and took it. But playtime's over. I could feel him trembling against my arm. Up close, he smelled like fear and cheap aftershave. Felix, let him go. Mira was pulling at my shoulder, but I ignored her. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly, speaking directly into Paul's ear. You're going to walk out that door. You're going to get in whatever piece of garbage you're driving these days. And you're never going to come back. You're never going to call. You're never going to text. You're never going to drive down this street or shop at the same stores or breathe the same air as my family. Because if you do, I'm going to forget that I'm a civilized person. I stepped back and let him go. Paul straightened his shirt and tried to regain some dignity, but his hands were shaking. You can't threaten me, Felix. There are laws. You're absolutely right. There are laws. Laws against child abuse. Laws against adultery in military families. Laws against a lot of things. I smiled at him, and apparently it wasn't a nice smile because he actually took a step backward. But you know what there aren't laws against? A man defending his home and family. A man exercising his Second Amendment rights on his own property. A man who's been trained to eliminate people having a conversation with someone who's been threatening his children. Paul looked at Mira, clearly expecting her to say something. She was staring at the floor. "Mira?" he said. She finally looked up, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Relief. Like part of her had been waiting for this moment. "Maybe you should go, Paul. Just for tonight. Let Felix and me talk." "Are you serious?" Paul's voice cracked a little. "After everything we've talked about? After all our plans?" "Plans?" I asked. Neither of them answered, but the look that passed between them told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just an affair. This was a takeover. Paul grabbed his jacket from the back of my chair and headed for the door. As he passed me, he leaned in close. "This isn't over, Felix. Mira and I love each other. We're going to be together, with or without your permission." I watched him walk out, then turned to my wife. She was still staring at the floor, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "Plans, Mira?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's not what you think. I think you and your boyfriend were planning to get rid of me permanently. I think you were hoping I wouldn't come back from Iraq. I think when that didn't happen, you decided to make my life so miserable that I'd leave on my own. That's not... And I think you used my children as leverage. You let him hurt them to keep them quiet about what was happening." She looked up at me then, and her tears were gone. In their place was something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. "Those boys needed discipline, Felix. They were running wild while you were playing soldier. Paul brought structure to this house. Paul brought his fists to this house. Sometimes children need more than timeouts and gentle words. You would know that if you'd been here." I stared at my wife, really looked at her, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd left behind to provide for our family, was gone. In her place was someone who could watch a man hit her children and call it discipline. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house. Tonight. Go stay with Paul or your sister or whoever. But get out." "You can't kick me out. I live here too. Watch me." I walked to the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized during the flight home. "Rosa Martinez, attorney at law." "Rosa, it's Felix Grant. I need that emergency custody order we talked about. Tonight." I hung up and looked at Mira, who had gone pale again. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I can, and I am. You want to be with Paul? Go be with Paul. But you're not doing it in my house, and you're not doing it around my children." She opened her mouth to argue, but footsteps on the stairs interrupted her. Jake and Tommy appeared in the doorway, looking between us with wide, frightened eyes. "Is Paul gone?" Tommy asked in a small voice. I knelt down and opened my arms. Both boys ran to me, and I held them tight. "Yeah, buddy, Paul's gone." "For good?" Jake asked hopefully. I looked over their heads at Mira, who was watching us with an expression I couldn't read. "Yeah," I said. "For good." Rosa Martinez had been my squad leader in Afghanistan before she went to law school. She was 5'4", tough as nails, and had once talked a Taliban commander into surrendering by convincing him she had air support when all she really had was a broken radio and a lot of attitude. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was Rosa. She arrived at my house at 8 p.m. sharp, carrying a briefcase and wearing the same no-nonsense expression she'd worn when we were dodging IEDs in Kandahar. "Felix," she said, giving me a quick hug, "you look like hell." "Feel worse. Thanks for coming so fast." "That's what you pay me for. Where are the boys?" "Upstairs. Asleep, finally. It took 3 stories and a promise that Paul wasn't coming back." Rosa nodded grimly. "And where's Mira?" "Gone. Packed a bag and left about an hour ago. Didn't say where she was going, but I can guess." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd found Paul making himself at home just hours earlier. Rosa opened her briefcase and pulled out several documents. I've been busy since you called. Emergency custody order, restraining order, and a few other things we might need. But Felix, I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Mira's not going to just roll over and let you take the kids. Let me? They're my kids too. I know that, and you know that. But family court doesn't always see it that way, especially when the mother claims the father is unstable due to PTSD. I stared at her. She said that? She's going to say that. Count on it. She's also going to claim you threatened Paul, that you're violent, that the deployment changed you. It's the standard playbook for these situations. And what's our playbook? Rosa smiled, and it reminded me of the expression she'd worn right before we raided the insurgent safe house. We're going to bury them in evidence. Photos of the bruises on Tommy's face. Medical records showing when the boys were treated for injuries while you were deployed. Testimony from neighbors about Paul's behavior. Financial records showing money being spent on things that weren't for the family. What kind of things? Hotel rooms, mostly. Seems like Mira and Paul have been taking a lot of afternoon trips to the Riverside Inn, always on days when the boys were in school. I felt sick. How did you find that out so fast? I have friends in useful places. Plus, Paul's not exactly a criminal mastermind. He paid for everything with his credit card. Over the next 2 hours, Rosa walked me through everything we'd need to do. Document everything, record every conversation, keep detailed logs of the boys' behavior and any signs of trauma, build a case that would be impossible to ignore. The most important thing, she said as she packed up her briefcase, is that you stay calm. Don't give them ammunition by losing your temper. Don't confront Paul again, no matter how much you want to. Let the system work. And if the system doesn't work? Rosa paused at the door and looked back at me. Then we get creative. But for now, we play by the rules. After she left, I checked on the boys. They were both in Jake's room, sleeping in the same bed. Tommy had his arm around his older brother, and Jake had positioned himself between Tommy and the door, like he was protecting him even in sleep. I sat in the chair beside the bed and watched them breathe. These were my children, my responsibility, my job to protect, and I'd failed them. I'd left them alone with a woman who'd let another man hurt them, and now I had to figure out how to fix it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This isn't over, Felix. Mira loves me, not you. The boys will learn to respect me. We're a family now. I stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Rosa with a note. Evidence. Then I typed back, come near my children again and find out what I learned in Iraq. I hit send before I could think better of it. The response came immediately. Is that a threat? I'm forwarding this to my lawyer. I almost laughed. Paul thought he was playing chess, but he was barely managing checkers. Every text he sent, every move he made was just more evidence for our case. But my amusement faded when I got another text, this one from Mira. You can't keep the boys from me forever. I'm their mother. Paul and I are going to fight for them. Then another. You think you're so smart, but you don't know everything. Paul has connections, people who can make life very difficult for you. And finally, the boys love Paul. They'll learn to accept him as their new father. It's better for everyone if you just let go. I screenshotted all 3 messages and forwarded them to Rosa. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed on the couch, positioning myself where I could see both the front door and the stairs leading to the boys' room. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning brought new challenges. Jake and Tommy were clingy and anxious, asking every few minutes if Paul was really gone and if Mommy was coming back. I made them breakfast and tried to act normal, but normal felt like a foreign concept. Around 10 a.m. there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers standing on my porch. Mr. Grant, we need to speak with you about an incident that was reported yesterday. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. What kind of incident? The older officer, a sergeant named Williams, consulted his notepad. We received a complaint that you threatened and physically assaulted a man named Paul Redding. Mr. Redding claims you attacked him in your kitchen and threatened to eliminate him. That's interesting. Did Mr. Redding mention what he was doing in my kitchen? He says he was helping your wife with childcare while you were deployed, and that you became violent when you discovered their relationship. I almost smiled. Paul was even dumber than I'd thought. Officers, would you like to see the evidence of how Mr. Redding was helping with childcare? I called the boys downstairs. Tommy still had the bruise on his cheek, and Jake had finger-shaped marks on his upper arm that were just starting to fade. Tommy, can you tell these officers how you got that bruise? Tommy looked scared, but Jake took his hand and nodded encouragingly. Paul hit me, Tommy said in a small voice. He said I was being bad. Officer Williams looked uncomfortable. His partner, a younger woman named Chen, knelt down to Tommy's level. When did this happen, sweetie? Lots of times, but Mommy said not to tell. The officers exchanged glances. Sergeant Williams cleared his throat. Mr. Grant, we're going to need to file a report about this. Child Protective Services will probably want to get involved. I understand. I've already contacted my attorney and we're pursuing custody through family court. And Mr. Redding's complaint? I looked Williams directly in the eye. I removed an abusive man from my home after discovering he'd been hitting my children. If he wants to call that assault, he's welcome to try explaining to a jury why he thinks he had the right to discipline other people's kids with his fists. After the officers left, I called Rosa and filled her in. She was pleased. Perfect. Now we have an official police report documenting the abuse. This just got a lot easier. What about Paul's complaint? What about it? He admitted to the police that he was having an affair with a married woman and disciplining her children. No prosecutor in the world would touch that case. But Rosa was wrong about one thing. It wasn't going to be easier. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. Paul drove by the house at all hours. Mira called constantly, alternating between tears and threats. Someone, I suspected Paul, called in a false report about suspicious activity at my address, bringing the police back out. The breaking point came on Friday afternoon. I was at the grocery store with the boys when I spotted Paul's car in the parking lot. He was sitting behind the wheel, watching us. Daddy, Jake whispered, grabbing my hand. Paul's here. I see him, buddy. Just stay close. We finished shopping quickly, but when we came out, Paul was standing by my truck. He'd positioned himself so we'd have to walk right past him to get to the driver's side. Hey there, boys, he said with a fake smile. Miss me? Tommy immediately hid behind my legs. Jake stepped protectively in front of his little brother. We don't miss you, Jake said, with more courage than any 8-year-old should have to muster. We want you to leave us alone. Paul's fake smile faltered. That's not very nice, Jake. I thought we were friends. Friends don't hit people, Tommy said from behind me. Paul, I said quietly, you need to leave. Now. This is a public parking lot, Felix. I have every right to be here. You have a restraining order that says you need to stay 50 feet away from my children. I'm not violating anything. I'm just shopping. He held up a grocery bag, but I could see it was empty. Get in the truck, boys, I said, without taking my eyes off Paul. As Jake and Tommy climbed into the back seat, Paul stepped closer. You can't protect them forever, Felix. Mira and I are going to get custody, and when we do, those boys are going to learn some respect. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I looked at Paul, really looked at him. He was sweating despite the cool October air. His hands were shaking slightly. He was scared, but he was also desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. Paul, let me give you some free advice. Walk away, right now. Take whatever money Mira's given you, get in your car, and drive as far away from here as you can. Because if you don't, this is going to end very badly for you. Are you threatening me again? I'm warning you. There's a difference. I got in my truck and drove away, leaving Paul standing alone in the parking lot. But as I watched him in my rearview mirror, I knew this was far from over. That night, after the boys were asleep, I sat at my computer and started planning. Rosa wanted to play by the rules, and that was fine for the legal side of things, but Paul had made this personal when he put his hands on my children. It was time to remind him why that was a mistake. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was making pancakes for the boys when Mrs. Cormier knocked on the back door, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone with serious news to share. "Felix, honey, we need to talk," she said, glancing around nervously. "Is it safe?" "Safe how? Are they listening? Paul and that woman?" I almost smiled. Mrs. Cormier had been watching too many spy movies. "No, Mrs. Cormier, they're not listening. Come in." She settled herself at the kitchen table while I sent the boys to watch cartoons in the living room. Then she opened the envelope and spread its contents across the table. "I've been busy," she announced proudly. The envelope contained photographs, printed emails, and what looked like a handwritten log with dates and times. Mrs. Cormier had been conducting surveillance like a professional. "This is from last Tuesday," she said, pointing to a photograph of Paul's car parked in my driveway. "And this is from Wednesday afternoon. That's Paul leaving through your back door at 2:15 p.m., right after the boys got home from school." The next photo showed Paul pushing Jake roughly toward the house. Jake's face was clearly visible, and he looked scared. "I took this one through my kitchen window on Thursday." That's Paul grabbing Tommy's arm. You can see the boy trying to pull away. I studied the photo carefully. Tommy's face was twisted with pain, and Paul's grip on his arm looked tight enough to leave marks. "Mrs. Cormier, this is incredible. How did you get all this?" She looked pleased with herself. "I may be 72, but I'm not stupid. I knew something was wrong from the moment that man started coming around, so I started keeping track." She showed me the handwritten log, 3 weeks of detailed entries, times Paul arrived and left, observations about the boy's behavior, notes about arguments she'd overheard. October 8th, 3:30 p.m. Paul arrived, boys came home crying. Heard yelling from inside house, then silence. October 10th, 2:00 p.m. Mira left for work. Paul stayed behind with boys. Heard Tommy screaming around 4 p.m. The entries went on and on, painting a picture of systematic abuse and intimidation. "But this is the best part," Mrs. Cormier said, pulling out a small digital recorder. "I recorded some of their conversations. The walls in these old houses aren't very thick, and my bedroom window is right next to yours." She pressed play, and I heard Paul's voice, slightly muffled but clearly audible. "Those brats need to learn who's in charge around here. When Felix is gone for good, things are going to be different." Then Mira's voice, "Just be patient. Felix won't fight for custody once he sees how expensive it'll be. He'll give up." Paul again. "And if he doesn't give up, then we'll make him give up. I know things about Felix that could ruin him. His drinking problem after his first deployment, the fight he got into at that bar. There are ways to make him look unstable." My hands clenched into fists as I listened. Mira was talking about incidents from years ago, a brief period when I'd struggled with adjustment after coming back from Afghanistan, a bar fight that had been completely justified self-defense. She was planning to twist everything to make me look like an unfit father. "There's more," Mrs. Cormier said, fast-forwarding the recording. Paul's voice, "What about the boys? They're not going to just accept me." Mira, "They'll learn. Children are resilient. A little discipline goes a long way." Paul, "Your husband's discipline clearly didn't work. Those kids have no respect." Mira, "Felix was always too soft on them. You're doing the right thing, making them mind." I had to stop the recording. I was shaking with rage, and Mrs. Cormier was watching me with concern. "Felix, honey, are you all right?" "I'm fine. Mrs. Cormier, you've been amazing. This evidence could change everything." "I hope so. Those boys deserve better." After she left, I called Rosa immediately. "You need to hear this," I said, and played the recording over the phone. Rosa was quiet for a long moment after it finished. "Felix, this is gold. With this recording and the photos, we can destroy them in court. But I have to ask, how did your neighbor get this? The legality might be questionable. She was in her own home, recording conversations she could hear through the walls. That's legal, right?" "In Maine, yes. One-party consent state, and she's technically a party if she can hear it from her own property. This is admissible." "Good. What's our next move?" "We accelerate everything. I'm filing for emergency custody tomorrow morning. With this evidence, I think we can get temporary full custody pending a hearing." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photos Mrs. Cormier had left behind. My children, scared and hurt, while I was halfway around the world thinking I was protecting them. But now I was home, and I had evidence, and I had a plan. I spent the rest of Sunday researching Paul Redding online. Social media made it easy. The man had no sense of privacy or discretion. His Facebook page was full of photos showing expensive dinners, new clothes, and weekend trips that his used car salesman's salary couldn't possibly support. More interesting were the comments on his posts. Several people asking when he was going to pay back money he owed them. A woman named Sandra posting angry messages about child support payments. A former business partner threatening legal action over a failed real estate deal. Paul Redding wasn't just a deadbeat. He was a deadbeat with enemies. I made a list of names and started making phone calls. Sandra turned out to be Paul's ex-wife, and she was more than happy to talk about her former husband's shortcomings. "Paul Redding is a snake," she said without preamble. "He owes me 6 months of child support, and that's just the beginning. Did you know he's been married 3 times? 3 women stupid enough to fall for his act?" "What kind of act?" "Oh, he's charming at first. Flowers, expensive dinners, big promises about the future. But once he's got his hooks in, the real Paul comes out. The Paul who screams at children and hits women and steals money from joint accounts." "He hits women?" "Honey, I've got hospital records if you need them. Paul's got a temper, especially when he's been drinking, and he's always drinking." I took notes as Sandra talked, building a profile of Paul that was even worse than I'd suspected. Domestic violence, financial fraud, child abandonment. The man was a walking disaster. "Why are you asking about Paul?" Sandra finally said. "Please tell me some other poor woman hasn't fallen for his garbage." I explained the situation, and Sandra's anger shifted into sympathy. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But you need to know, Paul doesn't just move on when relationships end. He gets obsessed. Stalking, harassment, threats. My current husband had to have a talk with him before he finally left me alone." "What kind of talk?" Sandra laughed grimly. "The kind where my husband showed Paul his gun collection and explained what would happen if Paul came around again. Some men only understand one language." After I hung up, I sat back and considered my options. The legal route was proceeding, but slowly. Paul was escalating his harassment, and I was worried about what he might do next. Maybe it was time to have the kind of conversation Sandra's husband had found effective. But first, I needed to know more about Paul's current situation. Where was he staying? What was he driving? Who was he talking to? I called a friend from my Army days who'd gone into private investigation after his discharge. Danny Walsh ran a small agency in Portland and owed me a favor from our time in Iraq. "Felix Grant," he said when he answered. "I heard you were back in town. How's civilian life treating you?" "It's complicated, Danny. I need a favor." I explained the situation, and Danny's tone became serious. "You want surveillance on this Paul character?" "I want to know everything about him. Where he's staying, what he's doing, who he's talking to. I want to know his patterns, his habits, his weaknesses." "Felix, you know I have to ask. What are you planning to do with this information?" "Nothing illegal. I just want to be prepared." Danny was quiet for a moment. "All right. Give me 48 hours. I'll have a complete profile for you. Thanks, Danny. I owe you. No, you don't. You saved my ass in Fallujah. This makes us even. That night, I tucked the boys into bed and read them 2 stories instead of 1. They seemed calmer than they had since I'd been back, like they were finally starting to believe that Paul was really gone. Daddy? Tommy said as I was turning off the light. Yeah, buddy? Are you going to go away again? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. No, Tommy, I'm staying right here. Promise? I promise. Jake sat up in bed. What if Paul comes back? I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at both my sons. Paul's not coming back, Jake. I won't let him. But what if he tries? I thought about Sandra's story, about her husband's gun collection and the conversation that had finally made Paul back down. Then I'll handle it, I said simply. That's what dads do. We protect our families. Both boys seemed satisfied with that answer. They settled back into their pillows, and within minutes, they were asleep. I sat in the dark room for a while, listening to them breathe and thinking about promises. I'd promised to protect them, and I'd failed once already. I wasn't going to fail again, whatever it took. Danny's surveillance report arrived Tuesday morning, and it was even better than I'd hoped. Paul Redding was staying at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, driving a 10-year-old Honda with expired registration, and spending most of his time at a dive bar called Murphy's Tavern. More importantly, he was broke, desperate, and making increasingly erratic decisions. Your boy's got serious money problems, Danny explained over coffee. Lost his job at the car lot last week for not showing up. Behind on the motel rent. Been trying to borrow money from anyone who'll listen. What about Mira? She's staying with her sister, but that's not going well either. I talked to the sister's neighbor. Lots of arguing, doors slamming, police called twice for noise complaints. I studied the surveillance photos Danny had taken. Paul looked rough, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, the desperate look of a man whose schemes were falling apart. There's something else, Danny said. Paul's been asking around about you. Specifically, he's been trying to find out if you have any vulnerabilities he can exploit. Criminal record, financial problems, that kind of thing. Find anything? Nothing useful. But Felix, this guy's getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. You need to be careful. That afternoon, Rosa called with good news. Emergency custody hearing is set for Thursday morning. With Mrs. Cormier's evidence and the police report, I'm confident we'll get temporary full custody. What about Mira? She'll get supervised visitation at best. The recordings of her condoning Paul's abuse of the children are devastating. And Paul? Paul's not a legal parent, so he has no standing in custody matters. Once we get the restraining order extended, he'll be legally required to stay away from you and the boys. Legally required. Right. Rosa caught the tone in my voice. Felix, don't do anything stupid. We're winning this the right way. But Wednesday night, Paul forced my hand. I was awakened at 2 a.m. by the sound of breaking glass downstairs. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping by my bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The living room window was shattered, and there was a brick on the floor surrounded by glass. A note was tied to the brick with rubber bands. This isn't over. You can't hide behind lawyers forever. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Paul was long gone. They took a report and said they'd increase patrols in the neighborhood, but I could see in their eyes that they didn't think it would help much. The boys had slept through the incident, but when they woke up Thursday morning and saw the boarded-up window, they were terrified. Is Paul coming back? Tommy asked, clinging to my leg. No, buddy. Paul's just scared because he knows he's in trouble. But I could see the fear in both their eyes, and I knew that legal victories weren't going to be enough. Paul had escalated to property destruction, and it was only a matter of time before he escalated further. The custody hearing went exactly as Rosa had predicted. Judge Morrison listened to the evidence, reviewed Mrs. Cormier's recordings and photographs, and granted me temporary full custody with supervised visitation for Mira. Mr. Redding, the judge said, looking directly at Paul, who had shown up with a cheap lawyer. You have no legal standing in this matter. However, I am extending the restraining order to include a 500-foot buffer around Mr. Grant's residence, his children's school, and any location where the children are present. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Paul's face was red with anger as we left the courthouse, but he didn't say anything. His lawyer, a tired-looking public defender, was already packing up his briefcase and heading for the door. Felix, Rosa said as we walked to our cars, this is a major victory. Paul's legally neutralized now. Is he? What do you mean? I pointed across the parking lot where Paul was sitting in his Honda, watching us. Does he look neutralized to you? Rosa followed my gaze and frowned. He's not doing anything illegal. Yet. That evening, I was helping Jake with homework when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Heavy breathing, then Paul's voice, slurred with alcohol. You think you won today, Felix? You think some piece of paper is going to stop me? Paul, you're violating the restraining order by calling me. Prove it. I'm using a burner phone from a payphone. Good luck tracing this. What do you want? I want you to understand something. Mira loves me. Those boys are going to be my sons, and you're going to be out of the picture, one way or another. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You took everything from me. My woman, my family, my future. Now, I'm going to take everything from you. The line went silent. I immediately called Rosa and reported the call, but as Paul had pointed out, there was no way to prove he'd made it. We'll mention it to the police, Rosa said, but without proof, there's not much they can do. Then I guess I'll have to handle this myself. Felix, don't... I hung up and called Danny. I need Paul Redding's exact location right now. Felix, what are you planning? I'm planning to have a conversation. Danny was quiet for a moment. Murphy's Tavern. He's been there for 3 hours and he's pretty drunk. Thanks. Felix, be careful. And if anyone asks, we never had this conversation. I called Mrs. Cormier and asked her to keep an eye on the boys for a couple of hours. Then I drove to Murphy's Tavern. The bar was exactly what I'd expected. Dim lighting, sticky floors, and the smell of stale beer and broken dreams. Paul was at the far end of the bar, hunched over a whiskey and talking loudly to anyone who'd listen. That's the problem with this country, he was saying to the bartender. No respect for family values. Man tries to help a woman raise her kids, and her husband comes back and ruins everything. I took the stool next to him. Interesting perspective. Paul turned and saw me, and his face went through several expressions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally drunken bravado. Well, well, if it isn't the war hero. Come to gloat? I came to talk. Nothing to talk about. You won, I lost. Happy now? I signaled the bartender for a beer and took a long sip before responding. Paul, I want you to understand something. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about my children's safety. Your children loved me. Your children were terrified of you. There's a difference. Paul's face flushed red. I gave those boys discipline, structure, things their father was too busy playing soldier to provide. You gave them bruises and nightmares. They needed tough love. I turned to face him fully. Paul, let me explain something to you. I've spent the last 3 years learning how to eliminate people efficiently and quietly. I've been trained by the United States Army to neutralize threats to American interests. And right now, you are a threat to my children. Paul's bravado faltered slightly. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. See, the thing about military training is that it teaches you to assess situations objectively. Right now, I'm looking at a man who has physically abused my children, harassed my family, stalked us, and made threats against our safety. In a combat zone, that man would be classified as a hostile target. I took another sip of beer and continued in the same conversational tone. Of course, we're not in a combat zone. We're in a bar in Portland, Maine, where there are laws and consequences, so instead of neutralizing the threat, I have to find other solutions. Like what? I smiled at him. Like making sure you understand that continuing to be a threat is a very bad idea. Paul tried to stand up, but he was drunker than he'd appeared. He swayed and had to grab the bar for support. You can't intimidate me, Felix. I know people. I have connections. Really? Like who? Paul's mouth opened and closed, but no names came out. Here's what I think, I continued. I think you're a small-time loser who saw an opportunity with my wife and thought you'd hit the jackpot. I think you figured you could move into my house, spend my money, and play daddy to my kids while I was overseas. And when that didn't work out, you decided to double down instead of cutting your losses. Mira loves me. Mira used you, just like you used her. The difference is, she's smart enough to know when it's over. Paul's face was getting redder, and his hands were shaking with anger. You don't know anything about love. You abandoned your family. I provided for my family, but you know what? You're right about one thing. I wasn't there to protect them when they needed me. I wasn't there to stop you from putting your hands on my children. I stood up and dropped a 20 on the bar. But I'm here now, Paul, and if you come near my family again, if you call, if you text, if you drive down my street, if you so much as think about my children, I will stop you, permanently. That's a threat. I'll call the police. No, Paul, that's a promise, and unlike your promises, I keep mine. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and Paul? Your motel manager is looking for you. Seems you're 3 days behind on rent. Might want to take care of that before they throw your stuff on the street. I left him sitting at the bar, staring into his whiskey and contemplating his rapidly shrinking options. The next morning, Danny called with an update. Your friend Paul checked out of the motel last night, packed up everything and left town, according to the desk clerk. Where'd he go? Nobody knows. But Felix, his car broke down about 50 miles south of here. State police found it abandoned on I-95 with a note on the windshield. Take it. I'm done. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. What about Mira? She's still at her sister's, but word is she's looking for her own place. Seems like she's finally accepting that Paul's not coming back. That afternoon, I picked up the boys from school and took them to the park. For the first time in weeks, they played without constantly looking over their shoulders. Tommy went down the slide head first, laughing. Jake made friends with another boy, and they chased each other around the playground. Daddy, Tommy said as we walked back to the car, is Paul really gone forever? Yeah, buddy, he's really gone. Good, Jake said firmly. We don't need him. We have you. As we drove home, I thought about the conversation at Murphy's Tavern and wondered if I should feel guilty about threatening Paul. But then I looked in the rearview mirror at my sons, safe, happy, no longer afraid, and decided that some things were worth whatever it took to protect them. Sometimes being a good father means being willing to be the bad guy.